Hello, I'm Andy Agafangelo. I'm carrying out this interview of Richard Emery in my capacity as chair of the Secretariat Committee to the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services. I am also, however, the founder of the Transparency Task Force, which provides the Secretariat to the All-Party Parliamentary Group. Richard, thank you very much indeed for agreeing to have this conversation with me. As you know, the conversation is being video recorded. It'll be placed on the APPG's website and we'll be drawing reference to it by way of social media. You're carrying out this conversation with me on the basis that you have already provided a written submission to the All-Party Parliamentary Group's call for evidence about the Financial Conduct Authority. Could I please invite you, Richard, first of all, to simply tell us a bit about yourself and outline, just briefly to begin with, how you came to interact with the Financial Conduct Authority.
Right. My name is Richard Emery. I have a trading identity of Four Keys International. I have a background in retail payment systems, the use of information technology, and I've worked in civil and criminal litigation for many years. What I now focus on is the investigation of bank fraud, primarily authorised push payment fraud, where I assist individuals who have been the victims of fraud to challenge their banks and take their complaints to the Financial Ombudsman Service. So that's primarily what I do. In terms of the other things, I'm an ambassador for the Transparency Task Force, and I'm a member of the Secretariat of the APPG for Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services. I interact with the FCA on matters primarily around understanding of various regulations, inquiring about FCA registrations, making complaints about banks, and proposing enhancements to the regulatory environment that I believe will reduce the level of authorised push payment fraud.
Thank you, Richard. Could you now please briefly describe the interactions you've personally had with the FCA?
My interactions with the FCA have dealt with four topics. The first of them has been seeking clarity of regulations, so specifically PSR 2017, because that is the most relevant regulatory environment for dealing with authorised push payment fraud. I've been concerned that the FCA has not correctly understood the original European directive, and I've been seeking clarification on issues of misdirected payment and malicious payee. It's been a long conversation. The conversation is still going on, and I'm still not happy with the answers that I've received. The second area that I've been looking at is the FCA's failure to act when told that a business is providing regulated activity, despite having their regulated status revoked several years ago. And that's a great area of concern because the FCA have acted by revoking a regulatory status, but have then not followed that through in making sure the organisation didn't continue to trade. Also find myself very frustrated with the FCA because when I talk to them and when I present complaints about individual firms, they don't respond by in any way telling me what they've actually done about it. And that makes it very difficult to pursue dialogue with them. And then the last thing is their apparent unwillingness to seriously consider formal proposals for regulatory developments that would reduce the level of APP fraud. I've presented several papers and they just seem to disappear into a hole and nobody seems to take them seriously.
Thank you again, Richard. In broad terms, what have your dealings with the FCA been like?
Disappointing. Although the FCA appear to be listening to what I'm saying, it's really very difficult to judge whether they're taking it seriously because there is no feedback to the conversation.
Thank you. Next question. Have you ever witnessed any actions or conduct that, in your reasonable belief, breached any law, regulatory code, or applicable or relevant policy? And if so, please explain which law, code, or policy you believe may have been breached.
I'm not aware of the FCA actually breaching any law or regulatory code. It's more about how they enforce the regulatory codes that there are.
Thank you. Have you experienced situations where interacting with the FCA has been helpful to either yourself or others? If so, please explain what made the interactions helpful.
Regrettably, no, because I feel they haven't responded to the issues that I've raised.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on whether the FCA lacks the powers that it needs, or conversely, that it doesn't make good use of the powers that it already has?
I believe that they do not exercise the powers that they have to the extent that they could. So the example which I've touched on before was an electronic money institution. They've had their regulatory status revoked, but they continue to be trading. When I contacted the FCA, I actually asked them the question about this, and the response I got from the consumer line was one of, well, they're not regulated, therefore they fall outside the FCA's responsibilities. And this is reflected on their website because it says, to report a scam or unauthorized firm, please tell us as much as you can about the firm or individual who contacted you. Remember, we can only look at scams or unauthorized conduct involving financial services that we regulate at the FCA. So where you have an unregulated firm, the FCA appear to be saying, we're not interested. What's the point of a regulator who doesn't act against an unregulated firm that is providing regulated services or activities? Surely they must act. Surely they must act.
And just for a point of clarification, Richard, am I right in saying that you're saying that the firm in question had its powers revoked by the FCA and it therefore became an unregulated entity?
Yes.
Thank you. Next question. Have you experienced any difficulties or shortcomings in your interactions with the FCA?
The lack of feedback to complaints.
And next question, have you experienced the FCA being reluctant to give clear answers to questions?
Yeah, I've been seeking clarity on a particular regulation in the payment services regulations, and I've been frustrated by the lack of clarity in their responses.
Thank you. What is your perception of the culture of the FCA and what do you think about it?
My view is that they appear to be reluctant to challenge firms that are not complying with the relevant regulations. Now, I'd like to add something at this point, which I didn't cover in the original questionnaire, because it has been raised more recently, and that is a question of compliance with the CHAPS process. The CHAPS process, for those people who are not aware, is to provide payment systems for high value payments which go through very quickly. And there is a CHAPS manual, and there is evidence that the banks are not complying with the CHAPS manual, but the FCA is saying it's not our responsibility to make sure that the banks comply. For me, that's crazy. There is a manual, there are a set of regulations, and nobody seems to want to enforce them.
Have you ever complained officially about the FCA?
No.
Next question. What do you think about the possibility of conflicts of interest issues at the FCA?
I am concerned about the possibility of what is sometimes described as the revolving door, where a regulator, in this case the FCA, and the firms that they regulate have a movement of people between the two organisations. Now, in some respects it's good, in some respects it's necessary, but it has a danger that people who are working for the FCA may be less willing to challenge firms when ultimately they may want to develop their career by moving in and working for those firms.
Thank you. Do you believe there should be spot checks by the FCA on regulated and or unregulated entities, perhaps similar to the spot checks by VAT inspectors?
Most definitely. They should develop a process of effective annual audits that go beyond simply asking, has anything changed that you want to tell us about? It's really very, very important. And I believe that that would pick up failures before they become serious.
What positives are there about the FCA that you would like to comment on?
It's really difficult because they have a difficult job to do. They have to maintain confidentiality. So I understand that, but the bottom line is, I don't believe they're actually really fulfilling the purpose that they were created. And therefore, it's very difficult to actually identify things that I feel positive about.
Thank you. If you could change 3 things about the FCA, what would they be?
2 comments. Provide meaningful feedback to complaints. Even just saying, we have done something about this, if they can't go into detail. But at the moment, it's just like tipping stuff down an empty hole. And then I think developing a culture where they can interact with people who are not employed by the firms that they regulate. So what I'm talking about is really independent people like myself who understand what's going on in the industry, but then they don't work for the regulator and they don't work for the regulated firms. But I believe that it should be possible to establish a process of, let's call them non-disclosure agreements, where I could have discussions with the FCA, I could make a contribution to the work of the FCA, but it would be done within the context of an NDA. And I believe the FCA could benefit significantly from that process. Point of history was when Which produced the super complaint, there were a series of meetings where people like myself actually met with the FCA and the payment systems regulator to help them understand the background to the super complaint. And I believe those meetings were really positive. They just haven't been repeated since those meetings.
Thank you, Richard. Just to provide some context, what was the super complaint about?
The super complaint was by Which, the Consumers Association, and it really dealt with the issue of the banks not reimbursing cases of authorised push payment fraud. And it led to the introduction of the contingent reimbursement model. And I believe it would be fair to say it also led to the introduction of confirmation of payee.
Thank you. The FCA is undertaking a transformation project. Do you have any comments to make about that?
We wait in hope.
Last question, Richard Emery. Are there any other comments that you would like to make?
Only to say that I believe that this consultation is really important and that I hope the FCA take note and that the transformation project builds on what this consultation discloses. And thank you for the opportunity of taking part.
Richard Emery, thank you very much for taking part. It's been very good to have the opportunity of collecting your views. So just to confirm, it's 9th of September 2021. We've been interviewing Richard Emery in relation to the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services, call for evidence about the Financial Conduct Authority. Richard, thank you very much.